Hello, adventure fans! Hope you got your fedoras, because today I am hoping to settle a long-standing debate. Raiders of the Lost Ark versus The Last Crusade. Which is the best Indiana Jones movie? The Indiana Jones movies have been a key part of my childhood, and this debate has been going on for decades, and hopefully today I will be able to put this debate to rest. And I'm going to do this by breaking down each movie into categories to see where they stand strong. Alright, first up, the MacGuffins. The MacGuffins in the Indiana Jones movies have always been a key aspect of the franchise because these are the objects that set the plot in motion. And for both of these movies, the MacGuffins in question are biblical objects. The Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. I'm going to start with the Holy Grail from The Last Crusade. It is one of the most legendary lost treasures in the history of the world. Even before The Last Crusade, it was already a pretty legendary artifact because of its use in the King Arthur legends, for instance. And in The Last Crusade, it has arguably the strongest symbolism of all the MacGuffins in the franchise. For Indiana Jones, the Holy Grail represents the idea of reconciliation with his father. He believes that if he can find this object, which his father has obsessed over for so many years, that he can earn his father's approval. And of course, in the end, he discovers that he doesn't need it to earn his approval. He always has been special to his father the whole time. And of course, a key moment in all of the Indiana Jones movies is the moment in which the MacGuffin in question reveals its power. And the scene in which the Holy Grail reveals its power is definitely one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the entire franchise. Indy is forced to retrieve the Grail after his father has been shot, so he now needs the Grail's healing powers to save his dad. And to see him finally pull through and bring the Grail back and heal his father so he can finally admire the object that he's searched for all his life, that is such a powerful moment. Next up, the Ark of the Covenant. Now, this one was not quite as famous as the Holy Grail was throughout history, but in the years following the release of Raiders of the Lost Ark, it has become just as iconic as the Holy Grail, and I think for many people it is the definitive Indiana Jones MacGuffin. And of course, it's now also one of the most iconic MacGuffins in the history of cinema. And as powerful as the scene where the Holy Grail reveals its power is, I think it definitely pales in comparison to the scene where the Ark of the Covenant reveals its power. Brought to life with some absolutely stunning special effects and bolstered by John Williams' incredible score, this is one of the most incredible moments in the franchise. A terrifying display of the wrath of God. It is not a scene that you are going to forget anytime soon, especially this bit. So yeah, overall, the Holy Grail does have the strongest symbolism and has the strongest emotional weight tied to it, but the Ark of the Covenant is still the definitive Indiana Jones MacGuffin, and it's more memorable, especially with that awesome scene where it reveals its power and strikes down the Nazis. So therefore, I'm going to give Raiders of the Lost Ark the first point for having the ultimate Indiana Jones MacGuffin. Alright, next up, the humor. The Indiana Jones movies were very good with his humor, largely because of the dry, sarcastic wit of Harrison Ford as the titular character. And there are many funny moments that I can talk about in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the most famous of which, of course, is this scene from the Cairo chase. And of course, Sala also provides a lot of comedic relief, especially in the part where he discovers that the Well of Souls is covered with asps, very dangerous, and then leans over to Indy and says, "You go first." Oh, and there's also this bit. So yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark definitely has some great comedic moments, but I think there's no competition for this one because it pales in comparison to the humor present in The Last Crusade. They bring back Sala for some more great comedic moments, and Marcus Brody, who in the previous film was more of a serious character, in this one he's actually brought along for the ride, and he becomes this sort of fish out of water sort of character. But the strongest comedic element in this entire movie, of course, is the dynamic between Indiana Jones and his dad. Sean Connery and Harrison Ford's chemistry in this film is spot on, and their dynamic as father and son is one of the highlights of the film, and it gives leeway to some of the most hilarious moments in the entire franchise.
Dad, 11 o'clock! What happens at 11 o'clock? John, I'm sorry. They got us.
They got us. And so yeah, as I said, there is no competition in this one. Raiders of the Lost Ark has some really great comedic moments, but it is nothing compared to the great comedy that is the combination of Harrison Ford and Sean Connery in The Last Crusade. So yeah, Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade definitely gets this point as the funniest Indiana Jones movie. Okay, next up, the love interest. So we start off strong with Marion Ravenwood representing Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Similar to Princess Leia in another George Lucas production, Star Wars, Marion is not your average damsel in distress. She's a tomboy who can hold her own in a fight and in a drinking contest. She does occasionally need rescuing, of course, but overall, she is a very capable character. And of course, she's also Indy's old flame. They have a history together, though this history does present a little problem, which is of course the age gap between her and Indy and the implication that something happened between them when Marion was much younger. But overall, Marion is still very highly regarded. Now for The Last Crusade, we have Elsa Schneider. Now, Elsa is very much a contrast with Marion. Instead of a tomboy, she is more of a femme fatale. She uses her feminine abilities to seduce Indy before eventually revealing herself to be a spy for the Nazis. She does have some redeemable qualities which show themselves towards the end of the movie, I think, but overall, Elsa is a character who is defined by greed, and it is that greed that eventually leads to her undoing. In the end, Elsa could not let it go. Yeah, that sounded much better in my head. So yeah, overall, Elsa is a very strong character, but I think for this one, I'm definitely going to go with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Marion as his old flame and his one true love, I think this is definitely a win for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Next up, the villains. And in both of these movies, we see Indiana Jones going up against the Nazis. So let's go through them one by one. In The Last Crusade, the first villains that we actually see are not the Nazis, but instead it's the Panama Hat Man and his team of grave robbers led by the Fedora guy. In the opening scene, we see young Indiana Jones getting in trouble with them as he finds them in possession of the Cross of Coronado and tries to make off with it. I do personally find the Fedora guy to be memorable because, of course, in the end, Indy actually manages to earn his respect, and in return, he gives him his hat. That's how Indy got his iconic fedora. And I think because of the fact that he ends up earning the admiration of Fedora, that I think he was the one that convinced the Panama Hat guy not to press charges on Indy. So I think he's definitely a memorable character for me because he's a more honorable villain. The main villain of the film, of course, is Walter Donovan, an American antiques collector who desires the Holy Grail and the promise of immortality, and it is that desire which drives him to join the Nazis. And then, of course, there's Elsa, the femme fatale, who also joins the Nazis out of desire for the Grail. And then leading the forces of the Third Reich is this guy, Vogel. Also, if you want to count all characters who oppose Indiana Jones, you might also include Kazim and the Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword because they initially are opposing India before they reveal themselves to actually be good guys. And another villain that I think we should talk about is the Pat Roach character. Pat Roach was an actor who had the distinction of appearing in all 3 of the Indiana Jones movies. In this one, however, he simply has a minor cameo as the guy who accompanies Vogel to the Zeppelin. He was originally going to have a big fight scene with Harrison Ford, just like in the previous 2 movies, but ultimately it was cut. This, I think, is perhaps not Pat Roach's most memorable role in the franchise, but that's just me. But now we will examine the villains in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So in this one, the Nazi forces are led by this guy, Dietrich, and his second-in-command, Gobler. And working for them are several spies and informants, like the Monkey Man, for instance. Now in this one, I feel even some of the minor villains are actually memorable, like the swordsman in the Cairo scene. It is a very brief and unceremonious appearance, admittedly, but still memorable. And there's also this guy, the soldier who beats up Indy in the truck and then throws him under the bus, or truck, or whatever. And then of course we have the Pat Roach villains. He actually has two roles in this movie. First he plays the giant Sherpa in the bar fight in Nepal, and then he appears as the bald-headed mechanic who beats up Indy after he tries to hijack a plane. This is perhaps Pat Roach's finest moment in the Indiana Jones franchise. And now, here's where things get really strong for Raiders of the Lost Ark, as it features two of the most legendary villains in the entire franchise. First, Major Arnold Taut, a Gestapo officer who first appears in Nepal to interrogate Marion about the location of the headpiece to the staff of Ra. He is an incredibly creepy and very sadistic character, and this has drawn criticism from some people as finding him to be one of those stereotypical, one-dimensional, pure evil Nazi sort of characters. Regardless, the character is still an incredibly intimidating and memorable character. And then, of course, we have Belloc. Renee Belloc, played expertly by Paul Freeman. And there is very little that I can say about this character that has not already been said. He is amazing, and I think perhaps the greatest Indiana Jones antagonist. And it's also very hard to forget a character who actually eats a fly in one scene.
You're gonna give mercenaries a bad name.
So yeah, overall, I think The Last Crusade does have some pretty solid villains, but definitely leaving it in the dust is Raiders of the Lost Ark with Belloc and Major Arnold Taut and the bald-headed mechanic and the swordsman and all the other characters. Overall, the villains definitely reign in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Next up, emotional core. Now, Raiders of the Lost Ark, this is pretty weak in that category. The emotional core is not very strong or non-existent, though I suppose there is the relationship between Indy and Marion, but that's it. This is not necessarily a bad thing, because the Indiana Jones movies are not meant to be deep and meaningful. They're meant to be fun, mainly. But that's not to discourage the franchise from not having any emotional value in it. And that is definitely a strong point in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The father and son relationship between Indy and his dad is one of the strongest points in the film. So overall, there's no competition for this. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade definitely has the biggest heart of all the Indiana Jones movies. And for that, it is definitely the victor in this category. Alright, next up, action sequences and set pieces. One final integral piece of the puzzle in any Indiana Jones movie. And Raiders of the Lost Ark, right off the bat, starts off very strong with the Golden Idol temple escape, which I think is hands down the greatest sequence in the entire franchise. After that, we have the bar fight in Nepal, we have the Cairo chase scene, we have the map room that can be counted as a set piece, we have the Well of Souls, the fight by the plane, the truck chase, and then of course there's the opening of the Ark sequence, which is another legendary moment from the franchise. The Last Crusade begins with a prologue with young Indiana Jones taking the Cross of Coronado from some grave robbers and then having them chase him across a train. Then, of course, there's a scene where Indy is navigating his way through the catacombs under Venice. There's the boat chase sequence. There's him and his dad escaping from the castle, which leads to a bike chase. I'm gonna count that as one giant escape sequence. There's the aerial dogfight. There's the tank sequence. And, of course, there's the final moments where Indy has to complete 3 challenges and then bring the Grail back to his father before Elsa gets greedy and tries to take the Grail, forcing them to escape from the temple as it's being destroyed. Overall, I feel both have some pretty strong action sequences and set pieces with all the stunts and fight scenes and escape scenes and stuff like that. And for the most part, I think they're very much on par. But I feel that the final set piece of The Last Crusade in the temple is just barely beaten out by the scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Ark of the Covenant destroys the Nazis. But what really puts that out of question, of course, is the opening scene of Raiders. Again, that is the greatest action sequence in the entire franchise. Full stop. So I think Raiders of the Lost Ark takes the cake for this one for having the best action sequences of the franchise. Okay, so after all this, what is my conclusion? Overall, The Last Crusade, I think, is very strong, and it's definitely one of the greatest action movies of all time. It is the funniest movie in the series, and it has the biggest emotional core of all the movies. And of course, there's also the final shot of the movie in which we see Indy and his dad and Marcus and Sala riding off into the sunset. It is the perfect ending to the movie, and for many people, it was the perfect ending to the entire franchise. Until, of course, they decided to make more movies. Though Raiders of the Lost Ark does have a lot of strong points as well. It has the definitive Indiana Jones MacGuffin, it has the best action sequences, and especially the best opening sequence, which is the most memorable sequence in the entire franchise. It has the best villains of the series, it has the best love interest, and of course all these elements, a lost treasure as a sort of MacGuffin, a love interest, a dastardly villain, and a whole lot of action pieces. These are the cornerstones of the Indiana Jones franchise, and Raiders of the Lost Ark is the definitive examples of all of those categories. Also, while The Last Crusade is pretty iconic in its own right, Raiders of the Lost Ark is still the most iconic film in the entire franchise. Again, the opening scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of the most iconic sequences of all time. And then of course there's him shooting the swordsman, the opening of the Ark, the scene where he sees that the Well of Souls is filled with snakes, and the Ark of the Covenant itself is one of the most iconic MacGuffins of all time. I think the definitive Indiana Jones movie has got to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. It embodies the Indiana Jones franchise better than any other movie. And so I declare that Raiders of the Lost Ark is the best movie in the Indiana Jones franchise. Well, thanks for watching. Be sure to comment down below your thoughts on this video, and I'll see you later. Take care.